This is Lightning Power Lunch on the Lightning Audio Network with Dave Mishkin and Greg Linnelli.
Oh, we're getting a little bit closer. Who's it going to be?
We got to wait 2 days in between games 5 and 6. Man. I think we blew out of last week's show and didn't actually get to the explanation that Steve provided as to why this is taking so long.
Incompetence?
To get through this final. Well, they started the series earlier than anticipated because both of the conference final series ended in 5, so they could start a little earlier. And then they're doing like a do-si-do with the NBA finals. That was what Steve shared with us as we were going off the air last week, which we both missed until we were off the air. So if you notice, the NBA finals also are often going every third night. So they don't want to go head-to-head. Or at least the NHL, when they set the schedule, was like, let's try and not go head-to-head with the NBA finals, and maybe the NBA felt the same way. So it's a combination of they started the series actually a little earlier than originally scheduled, and they don't want to go head-to-head with the NBA. The other part of this is it is a longer flight, which is maybe a good segue if we want to start with the series. I know we have some fan questions, and we have some news relating to the Lightning, but obviously the hockey world is focused on the Stanley Cup Final. Panthers lead 3-2. Since we last talked, they played 2 games. Yeah. So they managed to get in 2 games in a week. And Edmonton won in overtime in Game 4 to tie the series with a road win, and then the Panthers had a road win in Game 5 and can win the Stanley Cup in Game 6 tomorrow. So one of the things that I heard a lot on the broadcast for Game 5 was the impact of not having the extra day between games 4 and 5, because that was, other than the gap between games 1 and 2, the gap between games 4 and 5 was the only gap where there was only one day, and that was a travel day. Like both teams flew from South Florida to Edmonton on the one off day, and then they played, and it was pretty much like Eddie Olczyk and Brian Boucher were in consensus that they felt that it had an effect on kind of the energy level. It's like the mind wants to, but the body can't quite do it. So look, they're there. They can see what's happening on the ice. They are, I think, reacting to what their finger on the pulse is telling them. I'm not discounting what they are saying. I'm not there. But the reality is that was the best defensive performance by either team so far in this series, and it was Florida that did it. And when Florida D's up like that, I don't care if you have a 4-hour flight or a 40-minute flight, which is what the Lightning had. The other team is going to look that way. Edmonton looked like the Lightning in the first round when they struggled with what Florida was throwing at them. Edmonton looked like Toronto in the second round when that series got deep and Florida really clamped it down. And Edmonton in Game 5 looked like Carolina through much of the series between the teams. So if you remember last week, Greg, I was saying, will one of these teams reach the championship level that we saw from them defending? Florida through much of the playoffs, Edmonton more in certainly the third round and to a degree in the second round. We haven't seen it from Edmonton in the series. Edmonton does not defend at a championship level. They haven't. They could still get there. They're probably going to need to get there, but they haven't done it yet. I'm not sure Florida had done it either, even the 6-1 win in Game 3. And we had some fans push back a little bit last week. They're like, well, they defended better. Yeah, they defended better than Edmonton, but they didn't defend in Game 3 like they did in Game 5. Game 5, that was the Panther team that we've seen. Now, was some of this due to the travel, that Edmonton didn't have as much pushback because of the travel? Also, these teams are now almost 2 months into their playoff journeys. That can take a little tread off the tires.
Sure.
We'll see. They are going to get the extra day back. And Eddie Olczyk actually referenced when he won a Stanley Cup with the Rangers, he's like, we really benefited that we had the extra day between Game 6 and 7. They lost Game 6 in Vancouver. They had a cross-continent flight. And he's like, we had the extra day, and the Rangers played really well in Game 7, which they won at home and won the Stanley Cup. So, we'll see if the extra day helps Edmonton, basically. I'm not sure that Florida needed any help because Florida didn't seem overly affected by the every other day. They got the lead. Marchand had, I mean, he was the difference maker in Game 5. And while the second goal was the one that was viewed as more spectacular, probably the first goal was the more important one because it got Florida the lead, and now it was like Edmonton was just skating in quicksand. That's what I saw in Game 5. So one of two things needs to happen for Edmonton. Either they need to force the Panthers to play a little bit worse defensively, or they need to tighten things up themselves. And we're going to have almost like a chess match in Game 6 where it's like very low chance game. And I know Edmonton scored a couple of goals in the third period, but one took a sensational like passing play where McDavid got loose in front, a rare chance, and the other was a 6-on-5 goal. So
I think I'm going to simplify it for you. You know, I think the last time we spoke, I was pretty high that the Panthers were going to win this thing, and I still feel that way. I think the fact that Edmonton's going into this next game not knowing who their goaltender is going to be also is something that would just crazier things have happened. That doesn't mean their goaltender, whoever it is, can't have a tremendous performance and that the Oilers don't win the next two. That can happen. Unlikely. And I think if you're having questions at this stage about which goaltender you're going to use for Game 6, I think that is a little bit of a problem. And, you know, look, whether Bobrovsky's good or whether Bobrovsky's not, the Panthers aren't going to have that.
No, they're not.
And I also think, you know, where they were blowing the lead, what was it, in Game 4, right?
Yeah.
And then coming back and having the performance they did in Game 5. They've got
pretty impressive ice water in their veins. I mean, they are a championship team.
They are.
Yeah, they are not going to let a blown lead in Game 4 hang over them and affect kind of the next game. And I think that's a credit not just to the coaching staff, which I'm crediting the coaching staff. Paul Maurice and his staff clearly do a very, very good job in helping them turn the page, but also their pedigree. I mean, we've seen this, and I don't want to keep going back to the well with the Lightning because the Lightning have lost in the first round 3 years in a row now. You want to say, okay, it's not more recent, but going back a few years, you saw that from the Lightning too. They'd have a frustrating or difficult loss, and they'd come back and be buttoned up in the next game. I'm really thinking of that Islander series in 2021. Lightning had a 2-0 lead in Game 6, blew it, lost in overtime. Remember Coleman had that turnover right at the beginning of overtime, and Anthony Beauvillier scored. Like, that was a gut punch of a loss, and the Lightning came back, and they just suffocated the Islanders in Game 7. It was 1-0. Gord scored shorthanded, but forget the fact that it was 1-0. It could have been 2-0. It could have been 4-0. It was the nothing. Like, they gave up nothing in that game. Like, they were like, not happening again. If we get a lead, you guys are not coming back. This series is over. Done. We don't care what happened in the last game. And that's kind of what the Panthers showed, I thought, in Game 5. They were like, all right, they came back on us. That game's over. We're going to – they elevated. They elevated big time. There was no room for the Oilers. That was by far the most routine game Bobrovsky has had in this series. I think Bobrovsky's played well in the series. I'm saying, like, the Panthers made it a fairly routine night for him in Game 5, which is kind of what we've seen earlier in the playoffs.
And he mentioned that, too. He said, I thought the guys were just blocking shots. Yeah. They really made my life easy. And, you know, credit where credit's due. I know he's made impacts in other ways. Partner, I didn't realize that Connor McDavid only has one goal in this series.
Yeah, that is a little funny because it's been a high-scoring series. Now, he's had assists.
He has.
And their power play has helped them.
Yes.
Edmonton's. It didn't really in Game 5, but McDavid is part of the power play. It's just that he's not the one putting the puck in the net.
And could you win a series if, it's high scoring and you score a total of 25 goals, and Connor McDavid has 17 assists and no goals. Yeah, I mean, he's making an impact. Yeah. But I think for somebody like him, though,
Edmonton could still win the series.
Yeah, 100%.
But they're just gonna. It's not about how many goals McDavid is scoring.
But that's going to help.
Scored enough goals. Well, sure, it will help.
That's going to help. But that's going to help.
But with him having no goals through the first 4 games, they'd scored a lot of goals.
They have.
The problem was they were giving up too much, and their penalty kill still has not gotten to the point that it needs to get to.
For sure. And it's not the reason, if they do lose, that people are going to look at McDavid and they're going to say, okay, yes, the guy had 1 goal through 6 games if it goes that route. However, I do think, to be fair, when you are considered, one of the potential top 5, top 10 best players we've seen, you do want to have a bigger impact when it comes to these series for Connor McDavid. And I think that's fair to at least point out. I mean, let me ask you this, and we can ask our audience this at Bolts Radio if they want to get involved in the conversation. If I were to tell you that Connor McDavid was only going to score 1 goal through 6 or 7 games of the series, and I'm not telling you who wins it, would you tell me that would be acceptable? And my first inclination would be, partner, and I know you just came back in, that if I were to tell you before the series started that Connor McDavid would have 1 goal through 6 games, you have to know some other factors, obviously, but you would probably generally say, man, okay, Edmonton, I don't know if they can win if Connor McDavid is going to be held to just 1 goal. Now, that doesn't mean they can't, and you pointed out some reasons. Yes, they're in it. I just think that McDavid, a lot of star players are going to have signature moments in key times. This would be one of those. Like, it's okay for McDavid. You're considered an elite talent, generational type talent. Find a way to have a 2-goal, 2-assist effort tonight or tomorrow, and push this to a Game 7. Because I think if we're going to throw all the accolades to high-end players and generational type talents, and we do, everybody does, I think you have to do your part to put your skate down and say, okay, I'm going to be part of that. And look, I think one of the biggest issues, as I said at the beginning of this program, the fact Edmonton's still having some issues about who's going to be the goaltender, that's concerning, more so than Connor McDavid only having 1 goal. But that being said, I think Connor McDavid would be a guy that I'd look at and say, hey, you need to have yourself a game in Game 6.
I don't disagree with that. I think I would place more emphasis on McDavid having 1 goal through 5 games.
Yeah.
If, let's just say, the series was still 3-2 Florida. But in the 3 games Florida won, they won them like 2-1, right? And Edmonton was looking for offense, not getting it. And let's be honest, he is their best player. I was going to say arguably their best player, but I mean, he's their best player with Draisaitl maybe just right below him. Then that argument, I think, would carry a lot more water with me. But the fact that they've scored like 3, 4, 5 goals in a game, it's kind of like, all right, and he's helping. Like, he's helping facilitate some of these goals. He had an assist on the overtime winner that Draisaitl scored in Game 1. So, I mean, he is having an impact offensively. And as I said, I think their power plays had a pretty good series. It didn't score in the last game, but it really helped them in Game 4. I mean, they were down 3-0, and the power play got them a goal early in the second period and helped turn that game around. So, I mean, there have been some weird things that have happened in the series that I did not expect. I did not expect it to be as wide open as it has been. And I mean, really, I've given Florida credit for D'ing at a championship level in 1 game and Edmonton in none. So if we say each team has had 5 chances to defend at the level that we saw through much of the playoffs, and one team has managed to do it 1 out of 5 and the other team has done 0 out of 5, and I'll give the Panthers like a nod for Game 3. I mean, they held the Oilers to 1 goal, but I still think there were more scoring chances they allowed in that game than they probably would have liked. It's just that Bobrovsky gave them saves and then the game became a laugher. So it didn't really matter as much. But I'm not going to give them a high mark because there were too many chances against. So that has surprised me that neither team, which really got here mostly because of how they've defended through the first 3 rounds. And we haven't seen it in the series. Now, you brought up the point last week. Is that just that these teams' offenses are causing mistakes? Maybe. They're getting the extra day, right, to, get revved up. Sometimes a game just takes on a life of its own. The special teams have been a little bit of a problem in terms of the penalty kill for both these teams. Not every kill, but both teams have scored in the power play. And if you're going to score in the power play, that's going to bump the goal total up. But that's been a bit surprising to me. And then kind of going hand in hand with that is that the Panthers have blown leads. The 2 games that the Oilers have won, they rallied from a 2-goal deficit and a 3-goal deficit. And I can tell you right now, if you had asked me before the series, would Edmonton be able to rally from deficits of 2 and 3 in 2 separate games, I would have said absolutely not.
Yeah.
So how has that happened? Well, part of it is the Panthers have not, up until Game 5, have not locked things down like they did earlier in the playoffs. Now, I kept saying, they're getting closer. They're getting closer. Chums in the water. Now they are right there. They are right at the doorstep. Do we really expect them to have a clunker defensive game tomorrow night?
Yeah.
I mean, we're going to find out, but I would be, again, kind of surprised. I would expect to see from Florida what we saw in Game 5. And the onus is going to be on Edmonton to be like, all right, we need to play like we did in the Dallas series.
Yeah,
Dallas is a great team, tons of weapons offensively, look like could be a cup winner through the first 2 rounds, and we just shut them down. They got to try and do it. The Marchand, Lundell, Luostarine line has been a big, big problem for Edmonton. I mean, it's probably been their most. I know Reinhardt's got the same number of goals, I think, as Marchand. They're both at 5 or 6. Marchand has 6. Reinhardt has 5 or 6. And Reinhardt doesn't play on that line. But, I mean, look at the impact that Marchand has had in this series.
It's incredible.
Breakaway goals, overtime goals, the 2 huge goals he scored in Game 5. It really is incredible. I had said, if it's not... I had said last week, Bobrovsky maybe has been the most valuable Panther after 3 games. I said that in this series, but I didn't feel that he was necessarily in line to win the Conn Smythe for the whole playoffs. I'm like, maybe you're looking at Bennett. Bennett himself has 15 goals, but it may be Marchand. If the Panthers win in 6 or in 7, Marchand might win the Conn Smythe. I think he's been more impactful than Bennett in this series. I'm not sure for the whole playoffs, though.
Sam Bennett maybe for the whole playoffs.
Yeah, but Marchand has had a great playoff.
Oh, I mean,
that
Dave,
third line has been fantastic.
We're probably nitpicking because both of them have been really, really good. I think Bennett adds, kind of that flavor of being physical and, what he's done throughout these playoffs from that perspective. I mean, I think that is also some of the, what do they call the hidden yardage in football, stuff you don't see, but maybe that's accumulating throughout the course of these series. He's been fantastic. And the question is, can they even bring him back?
I don't know.
Next year.
I mean, he may have priced him. They have room, I think, but he may have priced himself, unless he really wants to stay. And he's like, I'm going to take a hometown discount. He might.
And he might.
One of the keys to the Panthers' run this year, I mean, they've been a good home team, but they've been fantastic on the road.
Yep.
And Bennett has done almost all of his goal production damage on the road. Of his 15 goals, I think 13 are on the road.
Yep.
And he's had separate 4-game and 6-game road goal streaks in this playoff. So, I mean, one reason why, not the only reason, but one reason why the Panthers have won some big, big road games, Bennett. In that he has helped
100%.
contribute offensively. I think they've won a lot of road games just because they're defending so well.
They are.
Right?
Another thing, and I didn't pay a ton of attention to, but I know it did get some publicity after the previous game, and this was something that I saw some national pundits pick up on a little bit more, partner. I don't know if you had any strong feelings, but it was the first time that Wallman and Ekholm had played together, and they both were on the ice for a few goals. Ekholm was playing on his offside, which is something he really didn't do, I don't think, all year. And it was interesting, that dynamic, that you make that type of move
right
in probably the most important game of the year.
So some of this is tied to the fact that they put Troy Stecher in.
Yes.
So they made the lineup
tied.
change with Stecher for Game 4, and then after a really rough first period, and Stecher got stripped by Verhaeghe on the third goal that happened late in the first period, Stecher basically didn't play. So while I understand what you're saying, I didn't watch it that closely, but I have to believe when they went 5D for basically the rest of Game 4, there were times that Wallman and Ekholm were on the ice together. It had to have happened, even if they technically weren't paired together, because Stecher hardly played in Game 4. So you're right. They got exposed. Both of them got exposed on the two Marchand goals, Ekholm on the first and Wallman on the second. Let's give some credit to Marchand. I mean, he's slippery. He's always been slippery. In other words, like, you think you have him, and then whoop, he makes a little move, and he finds space. And he did it on both.
Yeah.
So I think it's more a credit to the move he made. Wallman's been good for them. I mean, he was one of the guys that Jack Michaels mentioned before the series that he wasn't available, as was Ekholm, not available. Wallman, was hurt. And when he came back in, it really helped Edmonton's cause. He also scored a really big goal in Game 4 that, if not for Reinhardt's late goal, would have been the game winner. So, look, I mean, at the end of the day, it just comes down to D-up. You need to defend better.
You do.
You do. And I would feel very comfortable with Ekholm on the ice. Like, if I'm Edmonton, when I see Ekholm on the ice, it's in the range, the ballpark. I'm not sure if it's exact, but it's in the range of the ballpark of the Lightning when McDonough is on the ice. Or when, for the Panthers, Forsling is on the ice. Ekholm is just rock solid.
Yeah, there's a calmness there.
Very calm. Yeah. So that was just a one-off play where Marchand made a play. And Edmonton was missing some plays. But they didn't have a lot of plays to make in Game 5.
What do you make of this series? I've seen a lot of this, and I'm not one to reflect too much on it because I think we're living in the moment, so it's hard to remove that emotion for some people. The most entertaining final we've seen in 25 years, David. I'm sure there's been some entertaining finals. I just, I'm trying to think back.
I think that's the goal production and the fact that you've seen comebacks.
Right? Yeah.
I mean, I think Game 4, Game 3 would have been this way too. But I'm sorry, Game 5. Games 3 and 5, the team that scored first, Florida, just never lost the lead. But in the other three games, we've seen high-scoring games, lead changes, late goals, 6 attacker goals, overtime goals, highlight reel goals. Like, it's been an exciting offensive series. I think I saw after 4 games, it was the 4th highest scoring final in NHL history. At least 1 or 2 were from the 80s, which kind of makes sense. But that's surprising. It's surprising based on the era in which we're in. I know it's a high-scoring era, but this is an era of defending wins championships, too. And these two teams came into the final with that defensive pedigree in terms of, like, how they are winning. So I think from that standpoint, again, it was a little surprising. We'll see. I mean, to me, Game 5 was a low-chance game. It was. Panthers got their 5th goal into an empty net. They didn't have a ton of chances, but I thought they had better chances than they had chances early when they grabbed the lead. Edmonton had a hard time generating. We'll see if Game 6 follows suit.
Curious what our audience has to say at Bolts Radio. If you want to get involved in the conversation, you certainly can. So it looks like we're getting some news.
We can segue to the Lightning. If fans have any questions about the final, we're glad to get back to that.
We know some awards were handed out, right, over the last week.
We had some Olympic roster announcements earlier today,
roster.
too.
Steve just texted us the Lightning's players announced as part of the first 6 players for their country's Olympic rosters for February of 2026. Let's run through them real quick. Braden Point with Canada, Bjorkstrand with Denmark, Zemgus Girgensons, Latvia, Chernak, Slovakia, Hedman, Sweden.
And I confess I'm a little behind on this. Like, what's going on with Russia? Are they going to be able to field a team even if it's not under the flag? I'm not sure. Well, I have to believe if there is a team, they are not playing. Interesting. Well, Vasi and Kuch are going to get some time off. Yeah.
So you're going to.
So I guess that's set, right? Yeah. Those 5 players, it's not surprising, and of course you have more teams than Four Nations was 4 nations, right? You have I think 12, right, for the Olympics. So you see Denmark in there and Latvia. Switzerland has a team. Slovakia.
Russia hockey team's currently banned for participating there in the 2026 Winter Olympics.
And I guess because it's a team, because I remember in the last Olympics, which would have been the Summer Olympics, 2024, I watched some of it, and there were Russian athletes, but they kind of competed almost independent of the country, but they still got to compete. I guess it's kind of hard to do that when you're talking about a team, though. Anyway,
that's a tough call. That's a tough call, but
that's a subject for a different sort of podcast.
Yeah, we'll do that next week. So
but congratulations to those 5 players. Gergensen's that's a great honor for him. He talked about last year how important it was for him to be part of the Latvian World Junior team that he played on like 13 years ago or whatever it was.
And, I think what was one of the things you and I discussed when we were talking about this 4-nation tournament that they had here, that silliness that went on this season, like the Olympics. I'm willing to meet you halfway with some. I mean, I understand that comes around, once every 4 years. And as long as these players have the eligibility to play in that type of environment, I understand that. Playing for your country is a big, big deal. And it usually brings out some really good hockey. And nothing better than playing for your country.
Yeah. Look, there'll be a lot of eyeballs on these games, assuming that.
For sure.
I mean, things are a little different than like when I was a kid. I don't know if you knew this, Greg. The 1980 famous game between the USA and the USSR at Miracle on Ice and all of that.
Nobody saw it live, right?
Yeah, it was played in the middle of the afternoon. Now, that was in Lake Placid, but the game actually aired on tape delay. But because I think they wanted to play it prime time, and it's not like everybody had access through like, what's going on? Let me check my phone. But in subsequent years, like, you just had to either you watched at 3:00 in the morning, depending on when the games were, or they were played on tape delay the next day. And I mean, the 80 game was a little weird because I think they wanted it for prime time, so they held it. But where these Olympics take place matters because you could get away with a tape delay broadcast in 1984 or 1988 more than you can now, where everyone knows the final.
That's true.
Right? So I think how many eyeballs is somewhat contingent on when these games are going to air.
That's fair.
And people find a way to, like, if it's on at 11 a.m., like, people do, I think, find a way to watch it. But when it's like 4 a.m., that's tough.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that. And I think, does it bring in, we always get into this question about, does it bring in more interest in terms of the sport? I don't know. I think the Olympics, there's maybe a better chance of that happening because of the national pride that's involved. And then maybe you gravitate towards a player or two, if you're somebody like the casual fan that happens to be watching, because usually there's great stories surrounding that with a player maybe you never heard of, and you're like, wow, I want to follow that team. So maybe there is that spillover, but we'll see. But that is something you're going to be seeing, these preliminary rosters, at least 6 for these countries. But there was also over the last week the NHL awards, and we started to find out who was taking home some hardware. And did you have Connor Hellebuck winning both?
Well, I had him winning the Vezina. A lot of people were like, he might win the Hart. I'm like, really?
Yeah.
I'm not sure who I expected to win the Hart. I mean, I'm not sure that I expected Kucherov to win the Hart Trophy. Just because.
Now, why is
that?
Yes,
he led. Well, he led the league in scoring, but I mean, on our own show, we were taught. Now, most people who voted were not like absorbing this nuance. But we were talking about the most valuable people on the Lightning's team this year were the ones that helped them defensively, specifically Vasilevsky and McDonough.
Sure.
Right? We're like, they're not going to win the Hart Trophy. So if you're just looking at who got the most points, Kuch. So I think a lot of people maybe put him on their ballot because he had a great accomplishment this year in leading the league in scoring. But if people are looking at, well, Winnipeg improved more than people thought, and they were far and away the best defensive team, and their goalie was far and away statistically the best goalie. I mean, if you looked at the Vezina voting, Greg, which is by the GM, so there were 32 votes. That was it. I think he got 31 first-place votes. So, I mean, there was no disputing that Hellebuyck was viewed as the most valuable goaltender. And I think voters looked at what Winnipeg did as a team this year, how good they were defensively, and they're like, I'm putting Hellebuyck on there.
Yeah.
To me, there's always nuance. Like, Hellebuyck maybe was very, very good, but Winnipeg also played really, really – like, you're not going to get to those numbers if the team in front of the goalie isn't also playing really incredibly well. So, I don't know. I mean, I don't get too worked up about these votes. I do know you referenced this. Ryan Callahan kind of took up the mantle for Kuch, more about that we saw the votes. Right, I think he only had 11 first-place votes or something like that.
And was he saying he got penalized for not going to the All-Star game or something,
media.
right?
It's not just the media. I'm in the media. You're in the media. We don't get a vote for this, but it's the writers, the Professional Hockey Writers Association, or the NHLPA, not PA, PHA.
Right.
And, some writers, particularly Canadian-based writers, when the All-Star game was in Toronto, Kuch kind of lollygagged, right? I mean, there's Kuch was a little enigmatic during the skills and rubbed some people the wrong way. And Callie's point was these people are holding a bias against him, even though, I mean, Callahan brought this up because he got into it with some people who responded. He's like, they're not even having an All-Star game next year because this is not an important event for the players. Would rather get a few days off, right? I mean, I'm kind of paraphrasing what Callahan said. So he's like, a lot of people who go to the All-Star game probably feel the way Kucherov acted in the skills competition. So Steve is like bombarding us with information here. So Kucherov is the only player to win back-to-back Art Ross trophies and not win a Hart Trophy in one of those seasons. Kucherov got 25 first-place votes. I'm sorry. I thought he had 11. He had the fourth most first place votes. But, I mean, 25, think of all the writers that are out there who get a vote. That's a fairly small sample size. And, by the way, he barely got third. He had one more point than McKinnon, who finished fourth. So it was a fairly sizable gap between Kucherov and Draisaitl, who finished second, and a sizable gap between Draisaitl and Hellebuyck.
I think these awards, you and I have discussed them, the issues with them at times in terms of who wins them and what's the criteria.
Yeah.
It is odd to look at the years he's had, the last couple. And if you want to meet me halfway and say not even finish first, but where he's finished and barely getting the appropriate first place votes off of a guy who, no, correct me if I'm wrong, he won the Ted Lindsay Award, correct?
Yes. But it's a different...
I know.
So the players vote on this is different verbiage. It's kind of like most outstanding player or something.
So does that
like
lessen the blow?
Well, I mean, so like, are we going to say... So I think the problem here, if I go to the other side of the fence and I like take up the Callahan brigade, like, oh, Kuch got robbed. All right, so here's the problem that people who are arguing Kuch got robbed. Here is the beef behind their argument. That this really isn't the most valuable player award. I mean, we are not really talking about the most valuable player in most instances. We are talking about a player who is valuable, but the player who had the most impressive stats. That's really what we're talking about. And to that end, Hellebuyck, as a goalie, had incredible stats. So I think it even holds true this year. But offensively speaking, there is no player in the NHL who had better offensive numbers than Nikita Kucherov in each of the last 2 years.
Right.
So you want to say
sure.
that like point production doesn't necessarily translate to most value. Value, yes, most value. Maybe there's more value in a player who is a terrific two-way player, a defensive player, a player who erases more chances, which is different than maybe your goalie having great numbers. And they can track that, right? If they're going to track scoring chances, they can see which goalie is erasing the most chances. Maybe that goalie is the most valuable if we're going to look at goalies. But the voters don't vote that way. They don't really vote. I mean, they try and incorporate value.
Yeah.
But really, they're kind of doing the same thing the players are doing when they vote for the Lindsay Award, which is like the description of that award is really the description that we should have for the Hart Trophy, the way that they vote on it, which is most outstanding player. That's the Lindsay Award. The players are like, Kucherov this year was the most outstanding player in the NHL based on what he did. Voters for the Hart Trophy are like, well, the most valuable, we think Hellebuck was more valuable, which is kind of lip service in a way because what they're also looking at is Hellebuck's numbers, which were outstanding. So they in a way also voted for the most outstanding player, and Steve just had that stat that it's never been done before, and I mean that in a bad way. Back-to-back scoring titles, 0 Hart trophies in either of those 2 years. So historically, if you are leading the league in scoring, you are winning the Hart Trophy most years. And if you're not, it's kind of a weird, like somebody else jumped out of the woodwork to take it.
How many wins did Hellebuck get this year?
I don't remember off the top of my head, but I mean his numbers beyond wins. So he played about the same number as Vasi. I can look this up.
Yeah.
It was his other numbers that were, I mean, Vasi had a great year, and Vasi got just about every second place vote. All right, Steve has 47, 12, and 3.
Okay.
So we look at goalie stats.
And that's a great year.
That's a great year. So Hellebuck's goals against was 2. Vasi was 2.18.
Yeah.
So Vasi was, basically 0.2 of a goal worse, if I can use that word. I probably shouldn't. Save percentage was closer, 0.925 for Hellebuck, 0.921 for Vasi. But, I mean, 0.925 is exceptional. Actually, the guy who was closest was Kemper. Kemper's goals against was 2.02, and his save percentage was 0.922. So from that standpoint, he was very close to Hellebuck, but he played 13 fewer games than Hellebuck.
Right.
So Vasi was level with Hellebuck in terms of like games played. And he was behind in wins because Lightning didn't win as many games as Winnipeg. But he had a great, great year. Taking out the wins and the games played, Kemper was closest to Hellebuck in terms of the goals against and save percentage numbers. But Hellebuck played more than Kemper. So that's how they parse that.
It's I try not to get worked up over these awards. I think when you see something like that, though, for Kucherov, you do sometimes, okay, that doesn't feel right.
Well,
it doesn't feel right.
And maybe they need to, I mean, we already have a lot of awards, but maybe they need, like they've talked about, splitting the defenseman awards, because you noticed Ted and Cena. Speaking of, this is one thing we did take we were the flag bearers for this with the Norris Trophy, which is, why is the Norris Trophy always about the defenseman who is the most impressive offensive numbers? And in Ed's article, he had some people who were like, well, maybe there should be like a Bobby Orr award, which goes to the best offensive defenseman, and the Norris Trophy kind of goes to the best overall defenseman, taking in to account defensive.
Do you think the
prowess.
NHL?
And Ed actually referenced, how was it that Ryan McDonough only got X number of votes?
Well,
I'm like, yeah, exactly.
He was listening to our show. I mean, that's
right.
fine.
But it wasn't only McDonough. Slavin didn't get a lot of votes.
I guess my question
Forsling didn't get a lot of votes.
This can't be the first time this has happened with players who have made an impact defensively that should have been getting votes on a more larger platform than what we've seen. And I'm wondering if the NHL, this can't be the first time they've had these discussions internally with, hey, these defensive defensemen, where's the love?
Right.
You can phrase
or even
that
if you don't want to say defensive defensemen, but all around defensemen. I mean, maybe you factor in some offensive production.
Why do you have one for forward position and not for defenseman? The Selke.
Yeah.
I mean, why wouldn't you? You can have it. Listen, it's not said a lot, but you can have a really good two-way defenseman.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you can. And it's okay to sit there and say, hey, as a defenseman, oh, by the way, your job is to help prevent goals first and foremost.
Well, maybe that's why they have a forward award, because the forward is supposed to score. Ooh, but what about the forwards who defend really well?
But they acquiesced there and they gave them an award. And I don't know
That's
how
what
long
I mean,
I don't know how long that award's been in play.
It's been in play for quite some time.
So why in the world, at a position where you are supposed to prevent goals, you are the last line of defense before you get to the goaltender, why wouldn't you have an award that acknowledges the best defensive defenseman when you have it at the forward position? And this isn't the first time somebody's made the case for a defenseman to be included in the Norris. And some people may say, well, you're crazy. Your arguments don't hold weight because now you're putting Ryan McDonough in a situation where you're having to put him on a platform with all of these elite defensemen. You know why you're forcing us to do it? Because you don't have another award. That's why we're putting the Slavins and the McDonoughs into this conversation. If you had a separate category, we wouldn't be having these conversations.
Yeah,
but now you're forcing me to make an argument that I know Ryan McDonough's not going to get what he should with the Norris Trophy when it focuses on offense.
I think that they should add this defensive defenseman award, or make that the Norris, and add an offensive defenseman award, and let podcast hosts vote on the defensive defenseman award. Well, I mean, look, we're talking about getting back to the Hart Trophy for a second, why this is difficult.
Right.
And we don't mean to pick on, and the writers had all these votes, so we don't mean to pick on them. It's not easy. I've talked about people are like, how is it that Coop hasn't won the Jack Adams? I'm like, do you know how many votes Spencer Carberry got this year for first place? Yeah, but like,
right.
You can't blame the broadcasters for, like, we have to put our vote in before Carberry's team lost in the second round.
Yes.
We have to put our vote in based on this year alone, where Carberry's team had a great year and a huge improvement, and he, by any measure, had an enormous impact on the season that they had.
Sure.
So look, the broadcasters take criticism for that. It's not an easy vote for us.
It's not.
It's not an easy vote for the writers. But when we talk about MVP of the entire league over 6 months, you got 32 teams. You and I, at the beginning of the show, were kicking around who might win the Conn Smythe, where you're picking the Conn Smythe from, let's say, two teams. McDavid won it last year, the winning team and the losing team in the final. So you have a finite number.
Right.
You usually have a pretty clear idea of who might fit in that category. And even then, there's some debate about, well, Bennett for the whole playoffs, Marchand maybe in this series. Do we want to throw in Bobrovsky because, actually his numbers in this series are less good in some ways than they were earlier in the playoffs, but I think he's actually given them great goaltending in the Stanley Cup Final.
Yeah.
It's not an easy thing to pick the Conn Smythe. So how are you asking these writers to go through 82 games for 32 teams, all these players, and try and say, yes, this player was the most valuable? It's a hard thing. It's a hard vote. In a way, for the players who vote on most outstanding, they're just like, who do I think was I mean, there's nuance there too. There's gray area certainly, but these players play against Kucherov, if not with him, and they can see what he does. And they're like, This guy just deals.
He does.
He gets my vote.
I get that, and I can tell you right now, if you had something where it was like best defensive defenseman, you'd probably get an honest assessment from the players too.
Yeah, maybe the players should vote on that too.
Maybe. Well, I mean, I guess why wouldn't you? Why would you go, 1 foot in and 1 foot out?
Yeah,
It just doesn't make any sense. Steve also said last week, first and second All-Star teams were announced.
Kuch was on the first team. Yeah.
Hagel,
Hedman, Vasi, and Hagel were on the second. Yeah.
4 of the 12 players to make the 2 teams were Lightning players.
Yeah. Well, look, that's a very
Lightning, a good team.
Excellent representation. It is.
Lightning,
it is
a good
team. Something they can hang their hat on as we look toward next year. But, I mean, we have, about 15 minutes left. Do we have any questions you want to get to?
Bolts fan Syracuse, I miss hearing you all every day, but glad to still get to listen, especially as I impatiently wait for Gonsalves and his contract. Is it strange he isn't signed yet? Thoughts that he might be used to trade? I would be so sad.
All right, so we tried.
What are your thoughts on
this? We tried to do a little digging on Gonsalves.
Yeah.
To the best of my knowledge, I haven't heard that the Lightning have qualified him. If they haven't, so look, I'm not the GM, folks, so I'm just giving you my opinion. Gage Gonsalves will get qualified if he has not already been qualified, and I think you have until the end of the month. Once he is qualified, he's not going anywhere. He's a restricted free agent with arbitration rights, and usually the team and the player work out an agreement before it goes to arbitration. If it reaches arbitration, that's very rare, but then the arbitrator picks a number and both sides have to agree to it. And if the team says, we don't like this number, they can walk away and the player becomes a UFA. That is very, very rare. So this is not a situation like with the Stamkos deal last year where it's like, are they going to sign him? Like, the clock is ticking here. What's going to happen? I think this is much more cut and dry. Do I have a reason as to why they haven't qualified him? If, in fact, they haven't qualified him, I'm not sure if they have. But I haven't heard that they have. I don't have a reason. But, look, Julian called him maybe the player that has improved the most within the system last year.
Yeah, no doubt.
So I don't think he's going anywhere. Now, the other, by other, I'm talking about free agents that are unrestricted, which Gonsalves is not unrestricted. He is a restricted free agent. The UFAs, nothing on Atkinson, nothing on Glendening, nothing on Perbix. We're, June 16th, so we're a couple of weeks away. The longer that goes, the more likely it is that the Lightning have decided to move on from those players.
Perbix would be the one who'd be somewhat surprising, but you understand if they don't offer him why that would be the case. I think Atkinson and Glendening, I'm not surprised there. Perbix, if you like what he did last year and you felt like over the last couple of years he's turned himself into a solid defenseman, you and I have discussed that. He's an NHL defenseman.
Yeah, he is.
It's just a matter of where does he fit with this Lightning team? How much
they'd
do you
have
want
to give him a raise.
And are you comfortable with that?
They signed Crozier. They gave Crozier an extension.
Correct.
So, he kind of fits that position, and he would be cheaper. As we may have other questions about what the Lightning are going to do during the offseason, so let me call up their team on Puckpedia. They're at same as last week, I think, 3.48 available in cap space. That includes Sherry. So Sherry is due to make $2 million next year. If Sherry stays on the team, then that number that I just gave you, the open cap space, is accurate. If Sherry does not stay on the team and that he goes to Syracuse, then you can take $1.2 million off there because $800,000. No, that's wrong. It's that's right, because you save about 1.1, 1.2. So you create another million plus off that number. So you're at about 4.5. But you'd have to find a player to fill the spot vacated by Sherry.
I mean, I think Gonsalves is somebody that they want to keep and progress as a young player who got better, and that shouldn't be insignificant. So I think he's I think he remains a Lightning player. Is there always that chance that he's packaged in a trade for somebody else? Of course, we don't have that information, but I saw enough from Gage Gonsalves last year, partner, and I think you did too, where you said, yeah, he's one of their best 12 up front, and he's somebody that can help them.
Mm-hmm.
And those are players I think you want to keep. And in addition to Geeky, and you have the Dukes, and you have some of these players down there now who you're hoping can complement the Kucherovs and the Points and the Sorellis and the Hagels and all those players, Gensel, over the next couple of years. Bustabeek says, the team that rose out of the ashes of the 2019 Columbus postseason inferno was a team built to win, a team that could beat you any way needed. They could beat you fast or slow, clean or dirty. The result was 2 cups. Have the Lightning forgotten those lessons learned? Paid for dearly.
So I'm not gonna disagree with your statement, Bustabeek, because I agree that the Lightning, when they were winning back-to-back cups and then the third year when they went to the final, they did win a lot of series. They won 11 straight series. And so they won those 11 consecutive series against lots of different teams who played a variety of styles. And so you had to be able to, if not adjust to what the opponent was throwing at you, force the opponent to adjust to what you were doing, right? And so either way, like, you're pulling on the rope and you're having success pulling on the rope. So no matter the terrain you're in, maybe that's the way of putting it. Sometimes it's a little unfamiliar terrain. You're like, we're down, we're fine, in this type of series. We can succeed in this type of series. Ultimately, this is a results-oriented business. As you often say, Greg, you're judged on wins and losses. Mm-hmm. And for 3 straight years, the Lightning have lost in the first round. As I usually do on the show, people who listen regularly or watch regularly, I tend to be a little bit more in the realm of gray rather than black and white. Bustabeek was kind of black and white. He's like, the team that they had after Columbus could win a variety of ways, and this team seemingly can't. And I'm like, well, let's understand, and we mentioned this earlier in the playoffs, the team they happen to run into these last 2 years is shredding opponents right now. So when we look at what the Lightning are doing, we have to acknowledge that they have lost to a championship team last year. And if the Panthers win one of the next 2, the Lightning will have lost to a championship team this year. And even if the Panthers don't win, I think the Panthers have championship pedigree, and they played at a championship level against the Lightning. So this kind of goes to the question that we asked, kind of throwing it out there, and Julian gave us an answer when he said in the post-season press conference, I like our team.
Yeah.
The question was, how much of this is like something systemically is off with how the Lightning have built their team, and how much of it is due to some other factors, including the opponent, including injuries, including kind of the randomness of hockey. And Julian is putting more emphasis on the other stuff. Now, does that mean that they're going to keep the exact same team? No. I think we can see that already. Is it possible some of the fans were like, they need to get more physical, more gritty? I mean, depending on who they decide to bring in as a free agent, I think they are going to bring in some free agents. I mean, they have some open spots. It's going to have to be something they can afford. But I wouldn't be surprised if they look for a player of that ilk to add to the mix. But that's on the edges. That's not like kind of pulling out a core piece and changing the core identity of your team.
Yeah.
So what I am saying, Bustabeek, is that based on what we heard from the GM kind of disagrees with what you're saying. The GM believes that the Lightning are capable, basically with the group that they have and what he saw from them last year, that they are capable of winning playoff series against a variety of different opponents. It comes down to executing at a very high level.
It's
that may not be the answer that you want to hear, Bustabeek, but that's my answer. That's kind of how I'm seeing it from what we heard from Julian.
Yes, and it's hard to compare this year's team to the teams that won the Cup It's easy to do it. I think the thing that's always going to stick out for a lot of people, yes, there was a certain element of physicalness those teams displayed. I don't want to conflate, partner, the fighting with being physical. You had the element of the Bogosians and the Maroons, but I think where people come back comparing those teams to the ones now and what is the missing piece is how effective the third line was. We talk about that third line. I mean, it's going to go down in history as something that, 20 years from now, when they acknowledge those back-to-back cup-winning teams, that third line may get the biggest ovation just because of how they played and how hard they were to play against. But that's hard to replicate in many ways. To get a line like that of players who meshed really well at the right time and provided enough grit, but also scoring to be a difference maker. Yanni Gourde, Blake Coleman, and Barclay Goodrow. And it's hard to find that type of chemistry, with that type of line. Yeah. Not saying the Lightning's third line wasn't effective this year. It's going to be compared always to that line because of how effective they were. And so I think Julian is right. If you take a step back, where they look at things, Bustabeek, is the eye test. Metrically, they're going to look at a lot of things and say, how effective were we? And do you feel pretty comfortable with this group heading into next year? Yeah. I mean, look, you got defeated by arguably the best team in the NHL this year in the first round. The Lightning did that, by the way, to a bunch of teams who I'm sure felt like they were Stanley Cup contenders when the Lightning knocked them out. And you know what? The Lightning got bounced before they had their back-to-back runs partner to a hot Pittsburgh team and a hot Washington team, and a lot of people felt like maybe those Lightning teams were the best team coming out of the East. They just ran against some pretty good teams who got hot at the right time. It takes some luck involved too, when you take on these teams. And I don't think the Lightning forgot how to construct a Stanley Cup playoff-like roster. I think the organization collectively felt like this was a unit who could go very far in the playoffs.
And, you talk about a third line. Maybe we envision this for next year, but I think the Lightning envisioned it for the year that we just finished, that their third line was going to be Yanni Gourde, Oliver Bjorkstrand, and a third guy, whether it was Gage Gonsalves, who really elevated toward the end of the year, or somebody else. And what happened in this playoff series? They didn't have Oliver Bjorkstrand, and Yanni Gourde was playing basically the entire series with a broken finger.
Correct.
So what would that third line have looked like if they'd actually had a third line? You have to understand that was a piece of what happened in the series too. Would the Lightning have won the series had Bjorkstrand been healthy and Gourde not gotten a broken finger at the beginning of the series? Who knows? Maybe not. But, I think that this just backs up, there was a reason why the Lightning made that deal to get those two players and then re-upped Yanni during this offseason.
Yeah.
Those players are going to be slotted, at least at the start of next year, although I'd love to see Bjorkstrand in a top six, and I think he is going to be on the number one power play next year. But he can play in that third line role, and he's had success in that role in the playoffs. We mentioned he and Gourde and Eeli Tolvanen were the checking line against McKinnon and Colorado in 2023, and Seattle won that series. So we don't know. We don't know exactly how it's going to come together next year, but I think management feels the Lightning are closer than what 3 straight first-round exits might indicate.
Yep.
For the reasons that we've talked about many, many times on the show.
And we'll continue to do that.
And we'll continue
until we have this show.
Yes.
But we'll be on next Monday.
Yes. I'm leaving for a little family time after Monday, but we know we'll have a Stanley Cup champion at that point, and we'll be gearing up for the draft.
Yep.
Which will be that following week. So in other words, the weekend after this upcoming one is the draft, and then the week after, in Tuesdays, maybe July 1, will be free agency day.
Which will be a lot of fun.
Yeah.
for a lot of people, I think.
Where's Mitch Marner going to go?
That's the question.
Yeah.
You mentioned you get this far without anything happening. You're kind of like, all right, well, he's gone.
Yeah. There are reports as like he's not coming back to Toronto.
That's a blow. Not our problem.
Not.
We'll talk about it, though.
We will talk about it.
Partner, great job. Enjoy the game tomorrow. And we'll
too.
talk about the Stanley Cup winner on Monday, which will be a lot of fun. Thanks, Steve Ersnick. And everybody who listened, we appreciate you guys. You've been listening to Power Lunch on Lightning Radio.